Hey there, micro folks. This is Mr. Hooker, and this is Chapter 26, International Trade. This is the one we all been looking for. This is the last chapter of the text, well, of our semester. So let's get into it. So, some key trade facts. U.S. trade deficit in goods in 2021 was 1.091 trillion. Trade surplus in services in 2021 was 230 billion. Canada was our largest trade partner. The trade deficit with China was 355 billion in 21, and exports are 10% of our output. Our principal exports include chemicals, ag products, consumer durables, aircraft, computer software and services, educational services, and we provide about 9.5% of the world's exports. So, yes, we are a massive importer. Everybody knows, like you look at it, we got everything made in China, right? But what people overlook is the fact that we export a ton of stuff. We export a lot of stuff. And that just gets overlooked by the amount of stuff that we bring in. So, yeah, we ship a lot of stuff out as well. Principal U.S. imports include petroleum, automobiles, metals, household appliances, and computers. Exports is a share of GDP for selected nations. This is not good for us because it's as a percentage of GDP. So, us as a large nation, we don't do well on this one. So you've got Belgium at over 80%, Netherlands is over 80%, Germany a little over 40%, about 45. Mexico right at 40%, Italy probably a little over 30%, Canada a little over 30%, South Africa probably right at 30%, France at about 30, UK probably a little under 30, China just under 20%, Japan just a little under 20%, Brazil somewhere over, somewhere 15 to, 10 to 15. In the US, we're at, like we said, 10%. This made by China and America, that will be in the class for you. Economic basis for trade. Nations have different resource endowments. You're either labor intensive, land intensive, or capital intensive. So, you will figure out how you best make goods, and you will do that one of those three ways. And it kind of depends on what you have in your country. Do you have a lot of good, cheap labor? If so, you'll make labor intensive goods. If you have a lot of land, you'll make land intensive goods, a lot of agricultural stuff. If you have good capital, you'll make capital intensive goods. Um, and then you have to understand the difference between absolute and comparative advantage. So let's talk about that real quick. The first ever real economist, Adam Smith, right? 1776, General Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations. He said that for nations to trade, they would have to have absolute advantage. Absolute advantage is the ability to produce a good at a lower, using fewer resources, produce a good using fewer resources than another economic unit. That is absolute advantage. So he said for another, to trade with another economic unit, you would have to have absolute advantage. And then the Industrial Revolution happened. David Ricardo's like, yeah, no, Adam Smith was wrong. To trade, you just have to have comparative advantage, which is the ability to produce a good using fewer resources. And it's to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another economic unit. So not using fewer resources, but at a lower opportunity cost, and that is comparative advantage. So let's look at this. Assuming two nations with the same size labor force, constant costs in each country, different costs between countries, and the U.S. is going to have absolute advantage in both goods. The opportunity cost ratio is the slope of the curve. We're looking at vegetables sacrificed in per tons of beef. So Mexico, and U.S. and Mexico, U.S. on the left, Mexico on the right. The U.S. can produce 30 tons of vegetables or 30 tons of beef. Mexico can produce 20 tons of vegetables or 10 tons of beef. So the ratio for the U.S. is 1-to-1. The U.S. is going to give up 1 ton of vegetables for 1 ton of beef. So if we're looking at Mexico for vegetables in terms of beef, they are giving up 2 tons of vegetables for every 1 ton of beef, and a half ton of beef for every ton of vegetables. Okay, that is how that goes. They are each starting off. The U.S. is starting off at 12 vegetables, 18 beef, and Mexico is starting off at 4 vegetables, 8 beef. Okay, so could they trade and be better off? According to the comparative advantage and gains from trade, the U.S. before is 18 beef, 12 vegetable. Mexico is 8 beef, 4 vegetable. After specialization, the U.S. is going to make 30 beef, no vegetable, and Mexico is going to make 20 vegetable, no beef. And then we're going to trade, right? And so the U.S. is going to give Mexico 10 beef for 15 vegetable. And so that's going to be minus 10 for the U.S., plus 15, and then plus 10 for Mexico, minus 15. So after trade, the U.S. has 20 beef, 15 vegetable, and Mexico has 10 beef, 5 vegetable. U.S. gained 2 beef and 3 vegetable. Mexico gained 2 beef and 1 vegetable. All right, so yes, the U.S. gained more, but they had more resources to begin with, and so if they had not gained more, they would not have done this. So you just have to understand that. Everybody would be fine with this. How do we get to that point? You're going to trade somewhere between the opportunity costs, right? So your self-sufficiency output mix was that 12-18 and the 8-4. So total output's greatest when good is produced with the lowest domestic opportunity cost. 1 pound of vegetables was the opportunity cost of beef, and 2 pound of vegetables was what it was in Mexico. So here's where it is. Mexico had to give up 2 tons of vegetables to get a ton of beef, and a half ton of beef to get a ton of vegetables. The U.S. gives up a ton of beef, a ton of vegetables to get a ton of beef, and a ton of beef to get a ton of vegetables. So U.S. has the comparative advantage in beef, and Mexico has the comparative advantage in vegetables. Okay, so in terms of trade, U.S. is 1 beef to 1 vegetable. U.S. will sell a beef for more than 1 vegetable. So Mexico is 1 beef to 2 vegetables, so they'll pay less than 2 vegetables for beef. So you settle somewhere between the two. So we did so it's going to start somewhere at 1.5, around 1.5, and you can negotiate anywhere in that range. We just ended up right at the 1.5 and never really moved from it. And that is how that went. So your trading possibilities line, the slope equals that terms of trade, gives us improved options. Understand that international trade acts like the discovery of a new technology. So they ended up in a great place. It's like discovering a new technology for each country. Everything is good. They did complete specialization. You could do partial specialization, but that just gets more difficult. They ended up with more of both goods and a more efficient resource allocation. So this is the possibilities line and the gains from trade. U.S. did all beef, and then ended up over there at 45, 30 beef, 45 So and ended up at 20 and 45, right? Or 20 and something. Um, ended up at 20 and 15. There you go. There's the piece right there. So A prime. And then Mexico, theirs shifted out and they ended up at 12 and 5 or something like that. So both of them shifted out. Mexico shifted out a little less, but that's how that went. So increasing opportunity cost, the yellow concave production curve. So it's going to be a little bit out. Resources are not perfectly substitutable. You have incomplete specialization. Um, free trade does promote efficiency and promotes competition. Free trade is better than not. Understand that we are not in that area of like the greatest trade, greatest globalization ever. That was before World War One. So like the late 1800s till 19, so like 1870s, 1880s until Ferdinand got shot in 1910 or something like that, 1909, 1910, and then it all ended, and we haven't been good since as far as globalization. So that's kind of how that goes. Um, a supply and demand analysis of how this goes. You have the world price of a good, and then the domestic price with no trade, and the domestic price with trade. Um, so if the world price is greater than the domestic price, we have an export surplus, and then we get an export supply curve. If the world price is less than the domestic price, we have an import shortage, and we get an import supply curve. So let's look at what this would look like. So we're going to look at, I believe, aluminum. Yeah, aluminum. And on the left, we have the U.S. aluminum market. And the current domestic price for aluminum is $1. And at that, we're gonna have 100 million pounds. At $1.25, we are willing to. We have a surplus of 50. At $1.50, we have a surplus of 100. At 75 cents, we have a shortage of 50. At 50 cents, we have a shortage of 100. So there on the right, we have $1 being our equilibrium price. That's point A. The red curve going up is our export supply. The green curve going down is our import demand. Okay. And that's what it's going to look like. And then you're to just put other countries' export supplies and import demands on top of that. So here is Canada, right? Yep, Canada. And their country's equilibrium price, domestic equilibrium price is 75 cents. At $1, they have a surplus of 50. At $1.25, they have a surplus of 100. At 50 cents, they have a shortage of 50. So there is their export supply and import demand on the right. Green going down, red going up. So let's overlay the two. $1. At $1, you have the U.S., and at 75 cents, you have Canada. And you see that you have an equilibrium there at 88 cents, where U.S. import demand equals the Canadian export supply. And if you had more curves, you'd have other things going on there, and you'd see another whole world price. So that would be the world price, assuming these two countries. And that is kind of how that works with that. That is just an interesting thing. That's a simplified version of it. But if you have more countries, you just put more countries in there, and it just gets a little more complicated and goes a little bit different. We're going to stop right there, and we'll start with trade barriers and export subsidies in